Welcome back to another Game Time Discussions. I'm Emery Cuzzy. I'm sitting here with Cameron Selvey, and today we are finally ready to film our best ball introduction video. It's time to, make sure that we get all the information to y'all that y'all need so that y'all can be productive and be the best at best ball that you can. So,
yeah, I mean, we've done several drafts, we've done live streams, we've done all that, but this is a video that's going to be really important. It's basically going to be a reference point for you if you want to learn how the basics of strategies, what they mean, understanding the rules, regulations, all that good stuff, because this is a very different form of fantasy football compared to a regular redraft league where you can draft with your friends, pick up free agents, and then start whoever you want. This is way different. It's a different strategy. There's a lot more research that goes into it, and every single draft is worth money. So every pick is important.
right. And that's why we talk about the rankings every time we go on and do a stream for best ball. It's like the rankings are much better because people are putting money into this. Like you have the redraft leagues that aren't necessarily on point right now because they're behind. They have a lot of AIs drafting for them. But yeah, let's just get into it. So what we're going to start with is we're going to start with the rules. We're going to do a overview of the DraftKings rules more so than the underdog rules. We'll do our little snippets that talk about what the differences are. But basically with the DraftKings rules, and as you can kind of see on the screen here is, it's 20 rounds. You have a 12 teams. It's snake or a ladder draft, however you look at it. And basic roster construction when you're playing is you're going to have a quarterback, 2 running backs, 3 wide receivers, a tight end, and a flex. That means that certain positions are more important than others when you're drafting, and you have to make sure you have a certain amount so that you have enough depth for those positions that matter.
Right. I mean, the starting spots are pretty standard for most leagues. I know some in recent years have moved down to like a double flex and 2 receivers, so you have more flexibility. And this one is more traditional. Way back when it was always 3 receivers,
Mm-hmm.
and so now that's basically the starting spots. The good thing about this is there's not too much micromanaging that needs to go on because whoever is scoring the highest is automatically inserted into your lineups. You draft and then you watch and root for your team. That's all that needs to happen. Nothing needs to be done from your end throughout the season. It's just you're drafting and then letting it ride.
Yeah, and that's why Cam and I have drafted so many lineups is because when every week we go in and we look at them and we don't get to like adjust them or anything or edit them. It just happens. We get to enjoy being first, second, third, and they give you where you're at against other people. One thing I will say is, like Cam said, it's automatically inserted. Well, it's a total of the year. So basically week 1 to week 13, I believe. Week 14 is added together, and then that decides if you're top 2 in these big ones, you'll go into the next round, and then continuously until week 17 you have the championship, and hopefully you win a lot of money.
Yeah, and then basically the 12 that you draft with is the majority of you just want to be top 2. If you are able to advance, obviously 16% is what you want to happen, but a lot of times it'll be less than that. And then after that, it's the best 2 or best 1 in the final 2 weeks to advance. And then at the very end, you're just kind of put in a pool with a lot of guys that have the similar ownerships and stuff. If Puka Nakua goes off, a lot of people had Puka. Cooper Cup went off in 2021. Half the people had Puka
absolutely.
and Cooper Cup, and so that at that point, it's when you want to focus on the correlation, the big matchups in the playoffs, and then how to get different in those to where you're not going to have the guys this so similar, so you could be different and then win higher payouts.
Right. And so just to finish this off, there's no waiver wire, no trades, no weekly lineups. You just get to put it in, enjoy it. Picks for final.
Mm-hmm.
And then we have, of course, we're going to teach y'all, because in our experiences, we can kind of write off teams. Certain teams will be like, okay, that team has no chance because of how they constructed their lineup, how they did things. We're going to teach y'all how to make sure that y'all have a lineup that is always viable to making the next round.
I mean, it's always the worst thing when as soon as you finish drafting your team, you already feel like your lineup's dead.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I can usually point out 3 to 4 teams that I can just be like, they have no shot just based on the way that they drafted their team. essentially you just don't want to be a part of that, and then just ride with your guys and then correlate it as well as you can, whether that's through matchups, stacking, double stacking, handcuffing, all that good stuff, and we'll get into that shortly.
Right. So, just for the next slide, we're going to talk about some of the differences between DraftKings versus Underdog. DraftKings implements some rules that you don't normally see even in regular fantasy. They are a PPR league, but they do bonus points for 300-yard passers. And then if you're a rusher that goes over 100 yards or a receiver receiving yards over 100, you get 3 extra points. Those types of things actually matter when you're really thinking about who you're going to draft. Guys that are boom type of players that might go over 100 receiving yards that are in the 15th round, because there's 20 rounds, there's 240 total people. You have to find those guys that you're going to get 100 plus yards from, so that you can get them in your lineup, because 3 points is actually a lot.
Right. Yeah, and that makes a big deal for guys who are going to be passing leader contenders such as Dak Prescott, Tua Tagovailoa, those that could possibly go for 300 yards and just 1 touchdown. That's a lot higher of a floor on this platform than it is on something like Underdog, which would just give you about 15, 16 points, which is not what you want as your QB1.
Right. And let's talk about Underdog, it's half PPR, no bonuses. So that actually pushes up certain positions, right? Running backs are pushed up for sure in Underdog, because of the fact that they don't have to catch the ball to be productive. So guys that we've talked about Derrick Henry a lot, but if you think about Derrick Henry in the old days, he was productive on both sides, but Underdog was where he was king, because of the fact that he didn't have to contend with the receptions of a guy like Christian McCaffrey. He just had to run the ball and be really good at it.
Right. Yeah, and also, turnovers are slightly more paramount. It's -2 on Underdog as well, compared to just -1 on DraftKings. And essentially, if you're drafting or constructing lineups in different contests throughout the year on those platforms, they follow the same rules. It's not like it's any different. But yeah, that's pretty much the gist of the differences between them.
Oh, actually, one other thing. Underdog is 18 rounds. It's not 20 rounds. So Underdog, you have to construct your lineup a little differently because you only get 18 rounds.
Only 10 bench spots instead of 12.
Right. But you do get to push down tight ends, and you get to push down, because tight ends don't become as important, because you just need touchdowns out of them rather than, the 4 for 60 that you could get and be happy on the DraftKings site. But then if you look at the screen right now, you see a sheet that Cam and I create. This is for our schedule breakdowns. These things are important. Schedule matters in the playoffs. Schedule matters in the regular season. Cam did a great job last year. We talk about this all the time. Stephon Diggs, Josh Allen. We knew that the back half of the year, they were not going to be that productive. Cam said we're going to fade them all the way through. Well, the first 7 weeks, we were both sweating pretty hard because Stephon Diggs was like a number 2 wide receiver in the league. And then we were right. You were right. He came down to earth. He played in colder games, difficult games to play in, game scripts that were not friendly to him.
Probably had his worst stretch as a receiver since his rookie year, or even ever,
right?
Arguably. And that was a first-round pick that everybody was investing in. And we were essentially, I don't even know if we got any shares, maybe one just to have one.
Right.
But I mean, we did hundreds of drafts last year, and he was next to no ownership, and it worked out in that regard.
Yeah.
Some other people we took stands on as well for that, and it doesn't always work out. It's not an exact science on any of these things, but more often than not, if you follow the same kind of rules and make stands on certain people, it'll work out for you more often than not.
Right. And then if you look at the screen, so what I pulled up is a chart that basically takes last year's rushing yards that was given up to these teams. So basically, if say you take the schedule of all the teams that they're going to play in the first 17 weeks, and then you take those teams' DraftKings points given up to each position and add them all together and then divide them by however many weeks we have, that's what you're seeing on the screen. So Arizona, and this is for week 15 through 17 because we say playoff matters so much. But if you look, Arizona, or say this 27.4 down here for the Rams, that's how many points we're given up on average for the teams that they are going to play last season. So the 27.4 is here. I'll filter just to make it even easier. Oh, wrong direction. Is by far the highest for any position group or for anybody else against running backs. So San Francisco, the Jets, and Arizona gave up the most at that time. Now, of course, San Francisco, the Jets, and Arizona, two of those three are really good defenses, but they still did not do well against running backs last season. So we use this to kind of construct how we think going into the end of the season.
Yeah, I mean, this is a way to kind of differentiate because a lot of these guys I can rank Puka Nakua above Garrett Wilson, but they're really the same player, and you're
Mm-hmm.
just trying to find the tiebreaker if you don't want to just have the same exact percentage ownership for both guys. So if, say this guy has a better strength of schedule in the playoffs or has great matchups in the championship week, maybe I give him a little higher boost and a little less to this guy
Right.
because at the end of the day, they should both pan out pending health.
Of course. And so, and then let me get off of this screen. All right. And then just kind of something else we talk about that's important is, understanding what's draft trends, right? In DraftKings drafts, we see a lot of what's called zero RB and hero RB. That means we should expect running backs to come off the board in the 6th, 7th, 8th round. So just know those trends are coming so that you can get ahead of them rather than be behind them and not get a running back.
Right. Just as an example, when we first started doing this about 3 years ago, a lot of the big strategy was you needed 2 running backs in the first 4 rounds. Well, now because so many running backs either didn't pan out, several injuries to deal with, or busts, and all these receivers just went off, and it's a PPR league, that's basically vaulted all the receivers up, and RB2s that will be in the first 4 or 5 rounds in your redraft leagues are going in the 7th. And it just is making everybody do the hero style approach, like you said. Well, the way to get different and get off of that approach and differentiate your team a little bit is maybe going the extra big running back early, take one less running back bench spot away from your roster, and then add it to somewhere else and be different that way. Tight end is another big differentiator that really, it used to be just kind of really Travis Kelsey and then way back when Gronk in the first or
Right.
second round, and then everybody else like 5th round and later. Well, now it's kind of condensed to where about 7, 8 guys are going through rounds 3 through 6, and really it's a priority to grab at least one of those guys, and then you can stack whoever you want to later as your tight end too. But being able to just survive off of 2 tight ends is a lot more important than to have to draft a 3rd tight end
Right.
or even a 3rd
Absolutely.
quarterback for that matter.
Yeah, I was going to say quarterbacks and tight ends are two positions that are definitely you need to address early with purpose. With quarterback, you have to do it with purpose, of course, because you want to make sure you get a stack that you're comfortable with. And then go ahead. Sorry.
And then also just a quick tidbit is just if you are doing a 2 tight end or 2 quarterback approach, making sure that they're different buys. So we can stack about half of the NFL teams and feel good about it. But somebody like Buffalo and Jacksonville, who we're getting stacks of, they have the same bye week. So there's going to be a lot of turnover if you're stacking or double stacking those guys with those quarterbacks, and then you get a 0 in the quarterback spot, which is not helpful at all. You might as well just be going to another stack that you can feel just as comfortable with. Like in Trevor Lawrence, if he's going in the 11th round, well, so is Justin Herbert in the Chargers. All of
Right.
the guys are cheap. It's really easy to get different. There's not much heavily, with all the buys. Buys aren't nearly as important in redraft because you can do waiver wires
Right.
and bench people. But in these kinds of leagues, you don't want to have your 15th, 16th rounders having to start week 12 and pan out when you can organically get those big weeks throughout the year
Right.
whenever they come.
Yeah, you can construct your lineup so that they're, and you have to be cautious of that as it goes on. If you watch our best ball videos, we sometimes talk about, well, week 14 and week 12 are difficult. So you have to be very cautious of, if you're going to stack those weeks, getting a little different somewhere else. And then draft into talented and explosive offenses. we have some stands on players. I'm not really on the New York Giants. I don't expect them to score more than 14 points a game. And so if they can't score more than 14 points a game, there's not very many touchdowns to go around. There's not very many yards to go around. I'd much rather go to a team. Maybe I'm not as comfortable with the player necessarily, but I think, they could score, say, 24 points a game. And I'm like, okay, well, if he just gets 5 touchdowns this year, I'm very happy. So I think that's an important thing.
Right. I mean, if you look at the 10 highest scoring offenses last year, Dallas, Miami, San Fran, Baltimore, Detroit, Buffalo, Philly, Los Angeles Rams, Cleveland,
Mhm.
Indianapolis, those are all teams that we're heavily targeting. Maybe some we're targeting a little less because, for example, Miami, everybody's ownership is just high
Right.
other than Tua. And so you really have to invest early and often. It's really hard to, unless you have the third pick to get Tyreek and Jalen Waddle, and then you can wait for Tua eventually. But if you don't get either of those guys, it doesn't really make sense to stack Tua.
Right.
But then also Devon Achane and Mostert, handcuffing running backs is important. Or last year, the winning strategy had both Achane and Mostert who were going in the 10th and 11th rounds. They basically just were like, I don't know who's going to be good. I'm going to try both. And turns
Both
out
were
both
good.
were good.
Yeah.
So it worked out for a lot of teams.
Right.
My best teams had that kind of approach. Well, this year, one's going in the 7th and one's going in the 2nd.
Right.
That's a really early investment for two running backs from the same team. Jalen Wright, the third running back, if you were like one of them might go down, well, he's going in the 12th or 13th, and he's a 6th round rookie. It's really hard to get to them. But other than that, it's really easy. There's a lot of people with discounted ownership on all of these really good offenses that you can correlate really well.
Right. And don't forget, volume is king, guys. So with running backs, volume is king with running backs. With receivers, you do need touchdowns. You do need those things. And it's going to be a little bit harder for certain players to get the 100-yard bonuses because they're just not going to get, if there's only 200 passing yards in the whole game, are they getting half of them? It's a little hard to predict that.
Yeah, like last year there were 6 running backs, which it used to be way more than this, but 6 running backs had 300 or more touches. 5 of them finished as top 8 running backs.
Hmm.
The one that didn't was Tony Pollard. Obviously, he fell and he's way discounted now, but he's going as RB 32. And guess what? He finishes RB 18 last year. So that would be a return.
Hmm.
It's all about where you're getting them and what production you can expect from them.
Right.
If they were able to make the most of their opportunities.
And you're getting him in the 9th round. Say you get that approach that you did with Miami last year. 9th round, Tony,
Tajay Spears.
11th round, Tajay Spears, or 10th round, Tajay Spears. And so you get that similar approach. Stacking's important, and you don't know who's going to be the best guy in that offense. But then let's talk about some ownership. Ownership's very important, especially if you're going to play a bunch of these. And Cam, luckily, we have Cam here who plays, I don't know, 100 lineups at this point, right? Almost.
Yeah, at least.
So we have some really good ownership ideas here on the screen. If you look, just for let me just filter to running backs because that's the bulk of the end of the draft for Cam. And you can see that all of these guys, Audric, and then Zeke, Roshan, Khalil, Kamani, Trey Benson, all those guys, Damon Pierce, they're past the 10th round for the most part. Getting shares of these guys, taking stands is what we call it, will give you opportunities that if, we expect, in the later rounds, you have to find guys that you're like really comfortable with and you want pieces of because you think that they could turn out. Our favorite guy, Kamani Vidal. And there's a reason because Kamani could be the number one running back in the offense start week 1. And we just don't get that value in the 160s, 170s.
Yeah, I mean, with us, this is something that is probably the biggest difference if you watch other people with similar, intro and how-to videos on best ball. A lot of them like to divide up their ownership. Nobody has more than 30% ownership of anybody, and they just want to get sprinkles of everybody. That's what's called hedging bets. With us, especially in the later rounds, we want to take stands on guys because more often than not, if you have a belief in an opportunity or somebody individually, they're going to work out more often than not. And if they don't, it was a low risk pick. As an example, last year, 2 of our best calls was we're thinking of 20th round guys that we could just invest into. Ezekiel Elliott, before he was signed by the
Right.
Patriots, he was going undrafted or in the 20th round, and we didn't know where he'd go. He actually went to a spot that we weren't very comfortable with. But Ramondre Stevenson went down, and then weeks 12 through 17, he was RB13, RB11, depending on what platform you're using. Kareem Hunt, another example of he was a free agent. And then Nick Chubb goes down, and he goes right in, and he's the 1B to Jerome Ford.
Right.
Vulture 7 touchdowns. The 3-4 weeks that you needed him, he got you 14 points.
Mm-hmm.
That's kind of the guys that you want to take stands on. This year, there's a lot of rookie running backs because it's a down year, and then some of them went to bad situations for them to just have at least a minimal role outside of injuries. And we're taking advantage of that. Audric Estime, Denver, Javonte Williams, we got some shares of, but some people like Jaleel McLaughlin. He's vaulted into the 13th round right now as an undrafted scat back. And it's just like Audric Estime is so much better than him.
Oh, yeah.
And he's going undrafted because just nobody's on him. And that's why we have so much ownership.
Well, he was injured, and so people are off of him because it was literally just Javonte and Jaleel in camp, and so that injury hurt him. One thing I want to say is, we last year, and of course we're talking about undrafted free agents, but last year I was on Tank Dell. I wanted to get some Tank Dell. He was at 205, right? And I was like, okay, I'm going to click his name almost every time at 205. And then he moved into the 170s, 180s, and I was like, okay, well, I'm going to get off of him. Ownership will change depending on the month. That's a big thing that you have to think about when you're doing this. Is like,
yeah, a lot of these people, like, there's some Brees Hall, not Brees Hall. Braylon Allen is somebody that was going undrafted in the 20th round or 18th round on Underdog, very last round that we were getting all of. And then there's a viral pic of him being swole. He's always been swole, but it's just the public that's not paying attention didn't realize. And it's like, oh, he's 19, 20 years old and he's a freak. I'm going to click on him. And now he's going in the 17th round. We basically clicked him every time, and we just haven't been doing it as much. And we're still really high ownership with him.
So one thing about Braylon is he was, and we looked earlier because we were setting up this video. He was 309th on DraftKings. The first 240 you drafted, he was 309th when we drafted some of our first lineups with him, and he was free basically. And now you have to
180s, 190s.
Yeah, now you're paying a premium for him, and we have less ownership. As you see, he's 11.9% on Underdog for Cameron. But I bet if you look at just his
DraftKings, was my most owned guy for the first month that I did this, and I think somebody might have passed him. But we'll have a video with ownerships and exposures at the end of the best ball season. But yeah, that's basically what we're referring to when we're talking about taking stands on guys. Like M said, he took the Tank Dell stand last year. I took the John Mechie stand. It would have worked out for one of us, and honestly, probably logic if you just did 10% of both, it would be something. But I'd rather just have 20 of somebody, and be extremely different than just hedging all the time for everybody. Now, some situations you don't know, like a Curtis Samuel, Khalil Shakir. It's a wide open Buffalo offense, no wide receiver one, and they're both going at the same spot.
Right.
We're on one over the other. But if you wanted to divide up because you just don't know, like, more power to you. But we just feel that it will be a better return for us if we are right and we're believing in ourselves for those certain players.
Yeah, you just have to, we watch football. We scout players. We understand what kind of they're capable of, and if you think one guy's got more talent than the other, make that stand. We think Audric has more talent than Jaleel. We think Audric will be the backup at the end of the day. And so that's kind of how we feel. And then going over to, another thing we want to talk about is just stay consistent when you draft, guys. Make sure you do these things. Of course, we have this up here, but make sure you do these things. Queue players prior to draft. And of course, you've seen us mess up before with our drafts with queuing players. Of course, we've randomly accidentally hit the wrong player. We queued somebody later. We didn't draft because we're trying to talk and do all those things. But when you're doing it, you're going to be very focused on it. So you won't do that. That won't happen to you, of course.
And then also, I know it's like a practice what we preach approach, but usually when you see our live streams or stuff, we're not queuing as much. And it's because we do this so many times. Like, we've done over 100 drafts. If you're doing best ball and you're new to the game, you're probably going to only have 5, 6, maybe 7, get up to 20. Who knows? But we're doing this all the time. And so we're manipulating our ownership how we want to. And so certain times we're like, well, we're probably going to target this guy, but we're not going to queue him and force ourselves to take him,
Hmm.
especially if it ends up in an awkward draft spot to where we have to reach on
Hmm.
guys, because we don't love doing that all the time with our core players.
Right, exactly. And then if you look at the next part, construct and follow some sort of ranking system. Of course, if you've watched our fantasy football videos where we output all our stuff, you'll see that we have a ranking system, and I'll pull that up on the screen just so everybody can see it. But this ranking system is us, we put together some way for us to be able to, talk about these guys, of course, but also follow who is important to us and why we, where the differences are. We have a complete ranking system that has full differences of everything. You can see I'm changing it up there, individual position, our overalls. And right now we actually have a ton of other stuff, differentials based on where they are picked in DraftKings and Best Ball, just so that we know who's important, where we want to go, things to follow.
Yeah, and this isn't gospel. That we're not, selling our rankings saying this is the word, and if you don't believe in us, screw yourself. Like, if you look at our wide receiver rankings videos that we're putting out, there's tiers of
Here, I got it.
15
Hold on.
guys, and the tier between wide receiver 42 and wide receiver 27, the gap is so close that if you think Tank Dell is much better than T Higgins,
Right.
go for it. I'm not going to force you one way or the other. I have a certain type of way about players like Tank Dell, but I mean, they're all close and they all have similar paths. Most of them in good situations. Most of them have good matchups, good opportunity for volume, and probably there's going to be like 5 or 6 of those guys that get hurt. We can't predict that, but we're going to be, manipulating how we want to and can, and we're going to be up and down. This isn't going to stay the same throughout the year.
No, yeah, absolutely not. And if you look, like here's what Cam is talking about, the wide receiver depth galore. If you watch our video on wide receiver fantasy, you'll see all of this. We talked about each player, but on the right side is the differential based on where they're getting picked. And that's a big thing, because if you look at Tank Dell, who is 136 right here, he's minus 11 and a half basically, which means that we are 11 spots different from an average ranking of him based on the public. And that's important because he's getting drafted at wide receiver, 25, 24?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, he's going in the 3rd round, whereas Christian Watson's going in the 7th.
Yeah.
So it's also about where they're going and the value you're getting. So whether you believe Tank Dell is the wide receiver 1 or even 2 in Houston or not, the fact is 3 are going in the first 3 rounds.
Right.
Whereas Green Bay, good matchups, Jordan Love, a lot of people love him, and you only have 1 going in the first 6 rounds. So there's so many guys that could have similar opportunities or roles to Tank Dell that are going much later. So is it really worth your draft capital investing in a receiver that could be top 2 on his team as your second best receiver versus somebody that could be top 2 on your team as your wide receiver 5?
Right. Well, like if you look at it here, T Higgins, the wide receiver 2, Terry McLaurin, the wide receiver 1, Jaden Reed, wide receiver 1 or 2, if you're on Christian Watson, DeAndre Hopkins, Calvin Ridley, wide receiver 1 and 2 on their teams. Tank Dell, we expect to be 2.5. And I'd much rather get a guy much later that I can be like, he has upside to be the number 1 player on the team. Of course, the passing offenses are different. It's not that. But, T Higgins also plays in a high-powered passing offense. So just remember, we're not necessarily going to sell like a rankings that is, you have to follow, you have to do it this way. It's like, okay, well,
it's a reference point based on our expertise and the research that we've put in hundreds of hours into in the last 2 months.
right.
And if you don't want to follow it, cool, that's fine. I'm not right all the time, but I've done fairly well over the years
Mm-hmm.
in this format and redraft, what have you. Tons of experience, you do as well, and we're open to data points, research, all that stuff, and then also sprinkling a little bit of vibes and
Right.
gut feeling, because that's what, at the end of the day, that's what sports is. If you're an expert if you pick 50% correct on spread picks throughout the year.
Mm-hmm. Exactly.
And if I just have to go 1-1 every time and I'm considered an expert, like, sure. Let's do it.
We can do that. I feel like that's attainable, right? So yeah, let me stop sharing that. Let me get to the slide back. And so the next thing on our thing is, always stack your quarterback with your wide receiver / tight end. Double stacking is encouraged, of course. Double stacking means that, so if you have a quarterback, you want to stack them with one wide receiver and or a tight end, but you at times will try to get, if it's a high powered offense with a quarterback that doesn't run, Tua. You want to get both of the guys that are going to catch the ball for him, most likely, option 1 and 2.
Mhm.
Those funnel offenses, we do it a lot. We'll show you all in a second. CJ Stroud, we've had picks where we go Nico Collins, Stephon Diggs. 1 and 2, most likely on their team. That's how we feel personally. And we're getting the quarterback that stacks with them, and we're doing it as much as possible. We've had the Lions, Amon-Ra, Sam Laporta with Jared Goff. We've had Jalen Hurts with Devontae Smith, A.J. Brown.
Joe Burrow, T. Higgins, and
Right.
Jamar Chase
So,
/ Jermaine Burton. Yeah, like it just goes on and on. And then also, like he's saying with stacking, when we're talking about differentiators, late season matchups. And so if you're rolling through the most optimal possible high scoring games, Baltimore versus Houston, Detroit versus San Fran, Dallas versus Philly, I'll even throw in Miami, Cleveland,
right.
if the weather's presents itself correctly. And those 8 teams, we're getting a ton of those guys.
Mm-hmm.
And it's mainly because when we are making DFS or a weekly base lineup, we're probably going to be double stacking, bringing back with those matchups. And so if we're going to be already knowing that we're going to build that in December, why not just build a little bit of that with our core lineup in June and July?
Right, absolutely. That's what we showed you earlier with those schedule things, looking at week 15 through 18 or through 17, making sure that you attack the playoffs, because like Cam always says, we expect to make the playoffs. Like that's the expectation, and then we want to set ourselves up for the best opportunity to win at that time.
Yeah. I mean, because at the end of the day, if you got 3rd place versus 12th, it doesn't matter. You're going home. It doesn't matter in this style of play. You're getting $0 for finishing 3rd or 12th.
Right.
So if you are going to finish 1st or 2nd, you might as well do what you can to advance further and further. And
Right.
that's exactly what's going to happen.
Exactly. And then handcuff running backs are more valuable to you than others. Target in later rounds. That's guys, that handcuff means you go Travis Etienne. We have no shares of Tank Bigsby by himself. But when Travis Etienne's on our team, we get Tank Bigsby, because we know if Travis Etienne goes down, Tank Bigsby is going to be on the field.
Right.
We want his volume if something happens to our guys. One that I really like is, of course, Josh Jacobs, Marshawn Lloyd. We love doing that because we think that Marshawn Lloyd will get, if Josh Jacobs goes down, he gets 15, 16 rushing touches, and then he gets all the passing volume. So
yeah, I mean, essentially, you want guys that are going to step in and at least perform 80% in a short span of what the starter could.
Right.
We saw Alexander Madison when he was with Minnesota and Dalvin was there a couple of years back, when he would go down for 2, 3, 4 games, and then Madison would have multiple games of 30-point upside. Zamir White last year, again, he was undrafted or a 20th round pick.
Yeah.
Josh Jacobs missed the last 4 weeks of the season, and he had 20 touches every single week. Guys like that. Zeke, again, once we found out Ramondre and Zeke were the pairing, it's not an ideal pairing, but guess what? If you drafted Ramondre in the 3rd round, that did not work out.
Mm-hmm.
However, if you were able to make the playoffs despite that, Zeke filled in and was in your starting lineup during the playoffs every single week.
Right, exactly. And then the next one, get different somewhere. And what that means is it doesn't necessarily mean stray off of the path of your draft. It means that, while you're drafting, think about the fact that my ownership is set up this way. I have lineups that are constructed in the same way. How am I going to change this lineup so that it gives me an opportunity to be different? Gives me an opportunity to, if this doesn't pan out, how can I win in a different way? And also be different than what you'd expect public to do. Ownership on guys, of course, being different is, if a guy falls to you 2 rounds later, you should probably pick him. because that will not happen. Your lineup will never look like that again.
Mm-hmm.
And then sometimes it's late round, you get guys that are, different than what you've been doing, or like taking stands, of course, but like getting like a Chase Claypool, getting if your lineup construction's like I need 3 tight ends, well, Theo Johnson, the random guys that could be good late in the year could help your team in the playoffs that you weren't expecting. Those are guys that have been really good in best ball.
Mm-hmm.
Puka Nakua's.
Yeah, I mean, say for example, because we've had a ton of our drafts that we've gotten the 10th through 12th pick.
Right.
So essentially, we're starting with Garrett Wilson. Well, people who start with Garrett Wilson, if we had to just do an ownership of who goes next, 60% are going to go Jahmyr Gibbs if he's there. And then there's Marvin Harrison. And then there's Drake London. But there's not much of Jonathan Taylor.
Right.
There's not much of Saquon. There's not much of Nico. And obviously, some of those might be considered reaches, but it's attainable to, on the turnaround, get the second Houston receiver and then CJ. And then all of a sudden, you got your double. You're a little different up top because the pairing of Nico and Garrett Wilson aren't really going to be that common. And I'm not saying to reach on, somebody going in the late second, pick them with your first pick.
No.
That's a little overkill. But in this second round that we have already acknowledged time and time again is very awkward. And a lot of these people between 15 through 25, it's a toss up and I don't really know where to go. Well, that's where you can kind of sprinkle some, especially if you're consistently, I really love Garrett Wilson. I want to continue to pick him at 11. Well, the way to get different is, do some Taylor shares,
Right.
do some Saquon shares, do some Devontae Adams shares, do some of these, and et cetera and so on. And then over time, you'll be able to construct your roster throughout that draft a little differently because you went that direction.
Well, it's considered a reach to go Devontae at, the 15 or 14, but that's 3 spots early. It's not like it's a big reach. And one thing I will say is, when you're doing all this, we have tiers that we rank all these players in. And some, you could put the guy that's, say the tier's 5 guys. Normally the guy that's at the bottom of the tier could be the best guy in that tier. There's a reason they're tiered.
Mm-hmm.
So we're just going to take a guy that's not the number 1 in our tier rather than, we'll go with the 3rd guy in our tier, and that'll make us completely different than any other draft that we have done.
Right.
We like all those guys, and we think of them as a similar build, basically.
Yeah, and then what I meant, we mentioned touched on a little with the Mostert and HN kind of double take in the middle rounds last year. Well, there's a lot of guys in that range this year that, not many are going to just click on both of the people on the same team. Tony Pollard and Tajay Spears, I don't anticipate will be owned by the same team a ton.
Right.
Najee Harris, Jalen Warren. I don't know who's going to be productive, but I think that offense more caters to running backs. So clicking both of them in the 8th, 9th rounds. You got Chase Brown, Zach Moss. You got Zeke and Rico Dowdle. Kamani Vidal, once he starts continuing to rise, and Gus Edwards. I could go on and on. There's about 8 to 10 teams or situations in the 10th to 13th rounds where you can get Austin Eckler, Brian Robinson Jr.
Right.
Another example. Not many are going to grab both. So every now and again, getting both of them will set yourself different from that point as well.
Right, of course. And then we've already kind of talked about this. Take stands on late round players. Kamani Vidal, Braylon Allen when he was there. I'm taking stands on Rondale Moore because I think he could be the number 2, and he's could do a lot of things that are different than what they have. So
last year, our probably biggest mistake was when, as soon as we got we saw the Cooper Kupp, hamstring injury news, we didn't really take much of him, but we didn't pivot and say, okay, behind him, if he misses time, who can benefit the most? And Puka Nakua was just sitting there around pick 200 for the most of the part.
Right.
And then when we were like, oh, we know that Cooper is going to miss some time to start the year, he only rose to like the 13th round.
Right.
And we still didn't click on him. So essentially, when you start seeing those news, we're about to start training camp. If you see a nagging hamstring injury,
soft tissue is hard.
Soft tissue is hard to recover, and it just lingers. So those kinds of things, situations, try to see what you can do to benefit yourself from that team, and don't just completely fade just because I don't know if Puka. We were on Puka all off season as a talented player, and yet we still faded him.
Right, absolutely. And then let's get into some strategy. I mean, that's the thing that everybody probably wants to hear about. We're gonna start with the zero RB build. If you watch all of our stuff, we've done a lot of zero RB drafts, but some things to note. You just won't go RB until like the fifth, sixth, seventh round, and it's going to hinder you at that position, but you will be so strong at other positions, then you can just hammer that position over and over and over, giving you a lot of depth. Running backs, the reason the zero RB is a thing is because running backs in the 120s, 130s, 140s have actually ended up being the starters at times. Injuries happen a lot with running backs.
Yep.
You have to be very cautious of that, of course. And so this strategy has actually been the most used in the last 2 years. It's been the most productive in the last 2 years. Now, I'm not saying that it'll work this year. That might not happen. You might not see an injury in the top 8 running backs. That's possible. Don't get me wrong. But it's just what we've seen is injuries happen, especially for running backs. And this type of strategy caters to that fact.
Yeah, and because, like you said, the last couple of years, that's been kind of an optimal strategy. Everybody's following suit, and the
Right.
ADPs are reflecting that. So essentially, you can go your first 3 rounds and go 3 receivers hypothetically, and you'll see 4 of the 12 teams doing the same thing for the most part.
Right.
If everybody's drafting sharply, and then there's going to be an occasional somebody went tight end, somebody went a quarterback early, etc., and so on. Basically, like we said, a lot of RB2 capable guys that are going to be going in your 3rd or 4th round. The James Cooks, the Rashad Whites of the world, Josh Jacobs, Joe Mixons. Those are going to be 3rd, 4th round picks in your redraft leagues. In these drafts, they're going in the 5th, 6th round. So you're telling me you can get 3 receivers and an elite quarterback / and or tight end
Right.
in the first 5 rounds, and then get one of those guys, and then start kind of building your depth from there. That's exactly kind of the premise of where to go. The only thing is just because so many people are doing it, you're not going to be as different.
Right. You get those runs like we talked about on these guys. And so you have to make sure you almost start like half a round early when you have to think about it that way. Also, you need to pick safe running backs because you need to make sure that they're going to be on the field. You need to make sure that they aren't competing. Like, as much as we love Achane, he's not safe. And of course, I'm talking about a guy that's in the 3rd round. He's not necessarily safe because he could give you 4 points, fantasy points, or he could give you 40. And you don't know what week you're going to get each week. Getting safe running backs are guys like Alvin Kamara, who's going to, we actually have obviously ranked a lot higher. But he's going to get the touches that in the receiving game too that matter. A guy like David Montgomery, he's most likely going to have the goal line work, so he has the touchdown upside. Kenneth Walker is going in the mid 6th round right now. Things like that. Those types of guys that are a little bit safer.
Typically the optimal strategy with these kinds of drafts, because you can start up to 4 receivers, is at minimum in the first 8 rounds, you want to have minimum 4 receivers. In a lot of situations, 5.
Right, yeah.
And if you build strength from that position early, you won't have to go 8, 9 receivers later on.
Right.
Because really the optimal advance rate for receivers is pretty much 7 receivers is the sweet spot. But most of those 7 are going in the first 7 rounds.
Right.
So essentially, people are just hammering receiver and then building out the rest of the roster. And then late gems that are in good passing situations. Jermaine Burton replacing Tyler Boyd. Darnell Mooney as a wide receiver 2 to Kirk Cousins, who produces, etc. and so on. Those kinds of guys as the filler pieces. Quinn Johnston as a potential wide receiver 1 in
right.
Los Angeles this year. That's kind of the construction you want to go from the receiver perspective. And in turn, there's so many good running backs. The 8th to 12th rounds, if we're going to be doing drafts, there's so much green.
Yes,
because
depth is
that's where
crazy
everybody is hitting the depth.
And then one thing I will say also is like, and actually, let's jump into this draft that we brought up just to like talk about. And let me pull it up for you. And so basically, if you look at this draft, we went 4 early receivers in the first 5 rounds, and then we got an elite quarterback. Elite, you want to. So with elite quarterbacks, of course, you want to look for stacking. We did that here. We got Jalen Hurts and AJ Brown, right? We did a good job of that. One thing though is you always want to look for elite tight ends and elite quarterbacks in these earlier rounds if you can, and if they're falling to you, you should take them because they give you upside at those positions to only have to take 2. And if you look at this draft, we had to take 3 tight ends and 2 quarterbacks, which is fine. But when you only have to take 2, you can really hammer that running back position, give you that serious depth later on. And that also helps build out your roster too. If you look at this, though, we got in the first 5 rounds, we went true strategy. First 5 rounds, four receivers, high-end receivers, and Jalen Hurts. We probably don't have to touch receiver for, I don't know, 4 or 5 rounds, and then you start maybe getting another guy.
Yeah, I mean, in this exact strategy, we went, like I said, 5 receivers in the first 8 rounds, and then we didn't touch another receiver until round 18.
Well,
Yeah.
around 8, we went JSN in the 8th
That's what I'm
round.
saying. We
Oh,
went
okay.
5 receivers in the first 8 rounds, and then we didn't touch one until round 18.
Right.
Um,
All the way.
I think from that perspective,
Here we go.
when we were a little lighter on tight end, we were trying to find that second tight end later, and I think in this specific draft, they were going a little early, so our tight end depth was relatively weak.
Mm-hmm.
However, the depth at running back was pretty strong. This was before we kind of started, pulling back on the Nick Chubb this early, and his ADP has plummeted from
Right.
there. But at the same time, Brian Robinson, who's consistently going in the 10th round, we got 2 rounds later, and correlating other pieces of the offense for high powered potential offenses for if CMC goes down, who can potentially step in and show out. Eli Mitchell, 2 years ago, he was a 7th round pick before CMC came over. Dameon Pierce, 2 years ago, was a top 20 running back
Mm-hmm.
in terms of fantasy. He's in a high powered Houston offense. Joe Mixon could miss a month. Brian Robinson Jr., top 20 running back last year, etc. and so on. Nick Chubb,
Braylon Allen, 20th rounder.
Braylon Allen. This was the draft we were talking about where his ADP was 309.
Right.
So, yeah, that's just kind of an example build. Not our favorite team, but that's just kind of an example we wanted to show you about a 0 RB and how to kind of construct your line.
Yeah, and it's a path. You can see the path. You built the path, and you can make the narrative that the team could do well as long as you hit. You have to hit on the right guys. We did get a stack. One thing I will say is Joe Mixon, because we're going to talk about running backs here in a second. Joe Mixon, Dameon Pierce, got both of them.
Handcuff, yep.
So yeah, there's your handcuff, and so we'll talk about that here now. Let me close that, and then but yeah, so that's basically how you attack 0 running back strategies. Next up, we have what's called our hero running back strategy, and hero running backs, it's you get an elite running back in round 1 or 2, guys that you expect to have, could be running back 1 basically. I know everybody, we have even in our tiers, Christian McCaffrey is set into his own tier, but if he gets injured, any of the 7 guys right behind him, 6 guys right behind him could be we could see being running back number 1 overall at the end of the year. So you get that guy, whoever you think it could be. It could be, to you, Jahmyr Gibbs, whoever. And then you attack wide receiver, tight end through rounds 3 through 8. And if you look at the screen, we talked about what positions are taken in those times. Well, there are 48 wide receivers taken between rounds by round 8. That's all the way through wide receiver 4. So now if you don't get those wide receivers, this is why wide receiver is so important, especially in this time and age of how people are drafting. You have to attack that position so that you can get depth there, and then go from there.
Yeah, I mean, what's fun about this is volume is king when it comes to running backs. And essentially, last year, 300 touch guys, 5 of the 6 that did were top 8 running backs overall.
Mm-hmm.
So most of them probably paid out where you drafted them. There was one exception, but he still finished 20th. It was just ADP wasn't great value. But this year, because wide receiver has just so heavily jumped up in ADP for these kinds of this kind of format, you have guys that have 300 touch upside that are going in the 4th, 5th rounds, like ETN, Josh Jacobs, Joe Mixon, guys like that can still, in the running to be a hero RB build. I
Right.
wouldn't even consider them zero RB, that are going in the later rounds, which allows you to grab even more depth at the wide receiver position and then get some early doms at quarterback and tight end.
Right. And so um here's a quick draft that we did that has a hero RB build. You look at it here. We did actually a very fun. This was one of the drafts I really liked and was fun to us. But we did Brees Hall to start. He was our hero, and then we went back to back Houston players and got the stack with CJ Stroud. Now with this, we didn't draft another running back till the eighth round. Um, and our second running back was Ramondre Stevenson, which actually, I'm comfortable with as a somewhat safe guy. I don't see him getting all the passing work now that Antonio Gibson's there, but I still see him as somewhat safe because I think he gets all the volume running the ball. And then we built our roster out from there. We had to get 3 quarterbacks, unfortunately, but we did get Jake Ferguson as our tight end to kind of give us one of our top 8 tight ends, one of our top, I guess, 10 tight ends actually, and make us comfortable enough to only go to. So
yeah, I mean that's just kind of the premise behind it. Didn't really get any handcuffs, but again, not every strategy is going to play out exactly how you want it to.
exactly.
But most of the time, it will, and it'll result in a lineup that you're completely fine with. So, construction wise, very strong. And then depth wise, we took some stands on guys or just added pieces later in the draft. And again, we brought up just a quick tangent of quarterbacks and who could be a QB3, and obviously Justin Fields. I don't know if he will be the starter, but guess what? If he is, and he's the starter on the weekly basis, he has top 5 upside every
Right.
single week just because he can rush for 100 yards, and not many people have that ability or green light to do so.
Right, absolutely. So then a different kind of draft completely. This is actually something that we hadn't really done very much of, and we haven't actually necessarily perfected it because it's such a weird strategy that no one is so much doing. But if we follow all the things that everybody else does, we're gonna sooner or later have to, realize that something else is working this year. Um, Zero RB has worked the last 2 years. Hero RB has worked, right? Well, 2 years ago, like you said, it was 2 running backs in the first round. So let's do something a little crazy. Let's get what's called a robust strategy. And we actually did this on Underdog because Underdog caters to running backs, like we talked about earlier. And it doesn't matter because everybody's still just drafting as many wide receivers as they can on Underdog. So what we did is what's called robust. You start the draft off with 3 or 4 running backs in the first 4 rounds. We didn't necessarily do that in this draft, if you look, but at the same time, the running backs fell to us, and then we just pivoted to this strategy, and it was actually a fun pivot. But if you look at this draft right now, you start with Tyreek. We're the 3rd pick here. You start with Tyreek Hill, Devontae Adams, and then Kyron Williams falls to us, and we're like, okay, cool, we'll take him. And then Travis Etienne falls to us, and we're like, okay, Josh Jacobs. And we're like, okay, so now we're true robust because all 3 of those guys are top 9 running backs on our list, and we're very comfortable with all of them. Now with robust, you attack running back early, and then you go and build your roster because you only have 2 running back spots that are for sure each week, and then a flex spot that you could add somebody into basically. So with us, we're like, okay, well, let's attack every other position and find value at other positions and build out our roster that way. And it was a fun draft. We got Evan Ingram, Jackson Smith, and Jigba, but we didn't draft another running back until round 12, Marshawn Lloyd, who was a handcuff. And then round 14, we got Ray Davis, another rookie, but now we're just building out our roster for the bye weeks, basically. And it was a fun draft. It's different than what everybody else is doing. It adheres to Underdog more so than anything, and it flips the main strategy that everybody's doing on its head. So when everybody wants to draft wide receivers, we're drafting running backs. When everybody's drafting running backs, we're drafting wide receivers. And value happens that way.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I would actually like to try it again just because ADPs for running backs and even quarterbacks are falling even further down
Right.
now. Especially on underdog, which is crazy. Just to see what else we could build. But it's not a common one that I would go to. It's a rarity. It's if you are just doing a ton of lineups. If you are doing DraftKings has a $3.20 max.
Mm-hmm.
If you wanted to throw two lineups in that were just like,
Here's
I'm
our.
gonna just get 5 running backs,
Mm-hmm.
but 4 of them are gonna go early. Like that's the exact type of strategy you want to do. And then you could just it's a fun way to be different. And at some point, hero RB or zero RB is going to be a failure, and the public is going to be on that and be with that. You
Right.
just don't want to be a part of that entirely.
Right. Do something early so that you can be right. Early. And then just some notes about this. Go safe floor running backs early. You probably don't want the dev on it Achan because he's not safe. You have to have 20-point upside 20 points every week from your running backs. Basically, is how I look at it. Now, of course, we did it a little different. We didn't start with round one running back. If I would have gone Bijan, I would have been more comfortable than having Josh Jacobs in the fifth round. But at the same time, like I'm still comfortable that Josh Jacobs gets me 18 points a week. So that of course, safe floor running backs, and then high upside wide receivers. We talk about a guy like Rashid Shaheed. We talked about him the other day on the channel. He has the opportunity 4 times a year to go for, 4 catches for 150 yards and 2 touchdowns, and he's just electric like that. Josh Palmer could be the number one on his offense. Guys like that, and so getting those guys is important in that type of strategy for sure.
Right. And then also kind of finishing up with that same team, getting kind of splits of both, or somebody like Kirk Cousins, for example, who has had
Mm-hmm.
KJ Osborne's go off and Brandon Powell's and younger guys. Well, Atlanta is supposed to be airing it out a little more this year. Well, Rondale Moore and Darnell Mooney are 2 former second round picks, still young.
Mm-hmm.
And basically, I don't know who can or consistently be the number 2, but we've seen Rondale Moore go 3 for 90 a touchdown. We've seen Darnell Mooney have 1,000 yards. So you can't tell me that as a wide receiver 6 or 7 or 8 for your roster that you can't get, the occasional long 40-yard touchdown from
Right.
one of them.
Yeah,
Or
exactly.
both.
No, I completely agree. And then, and moving up to the next draft strategy, this one I really don't feel like it has a full explanation. Of course, it's just best player available, but there's certain ways to do it. Of course, you want to build your starters first. So if you get into a draft where you're just getting everybody to fall to you, it's like, why is this guy 15 picks late? Why is that guy 15 picks late? Right? Take those guys. Don't get scared of that. Of course, like you want to take good players that are going to make your draft. Of course, if you're getting a guy 15 picks late, your roster will be different than it could have been prior.
Right.
So you build your starters out first, not including your flex necessarily, and then you aim to take elite quarterbacks and tight ends, because when you build this type of roster, you have to find those guys that set you apart at the positions where there's only one starter. Those are the best players available, truly.
Yeah, internally, one of the funnest moments when you're building a team is if, say, you're in the middle of rounds and, man, I can't decide between Joe Mixon and Kenneth Walker. And then you go with one, and then 12 to 14 picks later, the other one is still there,
Oh,
and
yeah.
you need 2 running backs. And it's just like,
Sounds
yeah, I got both.
cool.
And obviously, more often than not, that's probably something that you are looking for at receiver.
Right.
In these drafts. But those are fun tidbits and things. And we're going to show a draft where essentially we just targeted guys that were just falling 6 to 10, or even we got a really late tight end. So like if essentially somebody's dropping a full round or even 2,
yeah, take him. I mean, that's the thing. Like, don't be scared just because no one else is on that guy, right? So here's our picks. Cam actually has the differentials of where they were ranked on his screen, but we start with Jamar Chase. He falls a spot because they pick him on raw over him, and that was cool. And then we actually somewhat reach on Kyron, but we wanted a running back.
But if you look, the reason that we kind of did that was that the first pick of the second round, the second pick of the second round, and the third pick were all running back. So we were like, okay, Kyron's not going to make it back to the third round, and then there's a huge drop off after that.
Right.
And so that's why we kind of reached on him and went 5. But other than that, you look at the next pick, Chris Olave, minus 10 spots. Say you flipped Chris Olave, which he's usually going mid-second round, and then Kyron in the third.
You
It's
have
the
yeah.
exact same thing. Travis Etienne fell all the way to the 4th, and this was before he truly did have, really 3-4 turn where his ADP was. He was actually going mid-third, and he went a full round, 7 spots lower than ADP. Zay Flowers has been going consistently in the 4th round, and this one he fell all the way to us late 5th.
15 spots or something crazy.
15 spots. Jaden Reed, another potential wide receiver, one in a good offense, fell 6 spots, and then we still needed tight end. So we went Evan Ingram, who was tight end 2 last year. Jordan Love to get the stack with Jaden Reed, fell 3 spots, and then
this is the crazy
Jake
one.
Ferguson fell 18 spots, and you just don't see him going pick 101. And we ended up taking him, and then we don't got to worry about tight end because you got 2 guys that have top 10 upside.
Right. One guy, this draft is really cool, and it doesn't happen that often. Sometimes you just get into lobbies where that's what you do. You have to pivot. We probably would have gone hero RB if Travis Etienne didn't fall 10 spots to us. And it would have been different. But we decided, and especially because I think we even talked about this on stream. It was like, okay, at the 2-8, well, we could go wide receiver, but look at all these running backs that are coming off the board. And then we went running back, and then it just started to work out in our favor. Don't be scared to do anything different. Kyron probably doesn't normally get picked there, but it's okay because it worked out, obviously. And it will work out.
Because Kyron kind of fell into the 3rd round and Etienne is now going the 4th, you're not going to have many lines that have both of them.
Right.
Because now, say Kyron's back to his true ADP of a 2-3 turn around pick 24. Well, Etienne needs to fall to 48.
Yeah.
He needs to fall to all the way there to get him. And so there's even less lines that are going to have both of those guys now.
Exactly. So let me jump off of this. And then we'll just, we'll get back to the next thing. It's going to be our players, like in position groups that matter and how you kind of like want to go through them. Just so y'all get a full overview. We've obviously talked about all these things already a little bit, but you're only allowed 1 quarterback and they cannot start in the flex. So you're only getting 1 quarterback unless you play a completely different type of league, like Superflex. Cam does that. I've done that in the past. If you want to do that, that's completely different. We're not making a video for that, but that's okay. But you only get 1 player and 1 quarterback can't start in the flex, and that's a big deal. And then when you think about quarterbacks, we've been talking about stacking. Continue doing it. Just do it. Do it with your 2nd quarterback. Do it with your 3rd quarterback if you have 3. What was it? Last night I had all 3 of my quarterbacks stacked. I had to go 3, but the last one I got was Gardner Minshew, and I stacked him with Jacoby Meyer and Brock Bowers.
Yep.
It's like one of those things. You have to, if you're going to do that, make the narrative, make it make sense, and then stack. So
yeah, and essentially kind of where you take your first quarterback determines how you can go 2 quarterbacks, or you never want to be, it's not both quarterback and tight end are like this. There hasn't really been a proven model of just like a higher success rate going Josh Allen and then Lamar Jackson.
right.
Or, going Travis Kelce and then Mark Andrews.
So there is actually, funny enough, Underdog, I saw this released, I don't know, last week or something. They did what's called bully tight end, where you double bully tight end, right?
Yeah.
And they found that success rate is lower than any other strategy.
It's the worst strategy to go
by far.
And people think that because you're able to get both and nobody else can, take either of these guys. Well, it really does not work out. And really, you only see at that point people doing it if they're just not new to this, or we'll see certain drafts like we did in our last live stream where somebody took 4 tight ends in the first 7 picks and just are sabotaging for other people.
Right.
And then at that point, that just drives everybody else up. And you got to pivot from there, like we said.
And well, also, I want to say that in recent years, going double bully tight end, there's only been like 6 tight ends that you're really comfortable with. This year, there's 11.
Yeah.
You don't even have to worry about it. Go ahead and do that because we're going to get our guys. Don't worry. Like later
Mhm.
on, it's fine if they want to go and be crazy and do ridiculous
Yeah,
things.
but in terms of quarterback, essentially, if you get somebody in the tier one of your guys, whether that's Mahomes, Allen, Hurts, Lamar Jackson, even CJ Stroud, some people like Anthony Richardson as a tier one QB, you probably don't need a second quarterback for a good portion until the Matthew Stafford, Baker Mayfield 14th, 15th roundish range.
Right.
Whereas if you went somebody that either didn't have as much rushing upside like a Tua or a Jordan Love or a Dak, maybe it's better to get a second quarterback kind of pretty shortly after that, like a Trevor Lawrence, a Justin Herbert, Jaden Daniels, Caleb Williams, all those guys, and getting two of those and then stacking from there, you should be good. And if you're not able to, and one of those quarterbacks is your first one,
Right.
that's totally fine. But at that point, you should probably go with the three quarterback route.
Right. And then just kind of we'll jump over to the running backs. And then at the end I'll walk through some like of just the guys that are on the lineups, of course. But if you look at running backs, injuries, man. They are like running backs every single year after age 28. We see it in every age, but age 28 and up, of course, there's injuries. Um, Draft some handcuffs. Get the guys that, stack some running backs on the same team, get some handcuffs, and make sure that you have guys that can come in if someone gets injured and do what Zeke did. Do what, these guys that, you see running back ones go down all the time. Christian McCaffrey, he's the number one overall player. He has had injury history. He has, been in turmoil, and you made your pick with him. Well, if you didn't get his backup, you were wrong. So make sure you do that. And then rookie running backs, they just get opportunities, guys. I know that this isn't a strong class, but that also reflects in ADP. We're not seeing the, Bijans of last year. We've had a top 12 rookie running back every single year for what, 8 years?
Yeah, minimum.
Minimum, right? Yeah. So a long time. And then there's always a running back dead zone. And you can either decide that you're going to attack it or you can get away from it completely. And that's normally between rounds 4 and I guess 3 and 5, 3 to 5, I guess. We're kind of actually attacking it this year, I think, because that's where Travis Etienne is. That's where Josh Jacobs is. We're not getting that much Isaiah Pacheco, but we're getting James Cook. We want to, at least. And those guys are actually players that we have higher than their current ADP versus the other guys. So
Yeah, and essentially just kind of get different where you can. Handcuffs so important, and then rookie running backs, like he said, not a strong class. A lot of them don't really have a role until an injury goes down. But guess what? Bucky Irving is the same type of player as Rashad White. Audric Estime was one of the leading nation rushing leaders. If you don't believe in Kamani Vidal, which you should, he was one of the highest touch people
right.
over the last 2 seasons in college football. They have opportunity if somebody in front of them goes down, and they're usually at a discount at ADP. Next year,
It's going to be
the class
insane.
is so insane that it's going to maybe flip fantasy football on its head because people are not going to know what to do or where to rank these guys, or we're just going to be attacking the hell out of them in the situations that they
I'm gonna have
get drafted
so
into.
many rookies next year, guys.
Mhm.
But yeah, so that's for running backs, and then we're gonna jump to wide receivers. Wide receivers, you get 3 starters on your team. It's the most started position by default. And then you could also get them in their flex. That's why you have these 0 running back builds happening so much. DraftKings actually adheres more to wide receivers early because it's PPR, and PPR hogs are at the top of the draft. And then, of course, you can start 4 of them. Mid-round, late-round guys, you want high upside. You want guys that are going to explode week once, you're going to expect to have boom games. And so getting those guys is important. Stack with quarterbacks, guys. That's a thing. Double stacking. We showed you the Texans where we got both Nico Collins and Stephon Diggs with CJ Stroud. We really like Houston's offense, and we know CJ Stroud's not a runner. He's going to throw the ball a lot.
Mhm.
And so we're trying to get that funnel, and we're not on as high on Tank Dell. So we get the 2 guys that we're high on.
Yeah, I mean, we can't stress enough, especially this year, the way ADPs are going. you have to minimum get 4 in the first 8 rounds. I mean, if you think about that, 8 times 12 is 96. Essentially, the top 100, there was like 25 running backs going, but there's 50 plus receivers going
Yeah.
in the same range. So it's basically 2 for 1 at the same position. So if you only had 3 going into the 9th round, you're picking outside of top 50 dart throws the rest of the time for the majority of your receivers, and that's just not something you want to do.
Right. And then I want to talk about the rookies. So if you look at the screen now, you will see that, we're just looking at the wide receivers, and number 13, rookie wide receiver, Marvin Harrison. Number 31, rookie wide receiver, Malik Neighbors. Let's see. Hold on here. Get the run. Keon Coleman, 66. Xavier Worthy, 70. Vlad McConkey, 74. 77's Rome. Brian Thomas, 87. Like, these rookie receivers are insanely priced on ADP. And being able to kind of see that and figure out how you're going to go about it. We love Marvin Harrison. We've been getting him at 13. But you keep bringing up the stats of no other rookie's ever been that high, obviously. And no other rookie has even been 31, where Malik Neighbors is. I'm going to let you explain it because you have all the
Yeah, I
stats. You
mean,
have all the idea.
essentially, receivers are normally a slow burn with track record, but because of the big seasons from Jamar Chase recently, Justin Jefferson, Puka Nacua last year, people are just like, oh, well, these rookies are capable of going early, which they can. However, not all of them do. Like, one in however many receivers last year, Puka was a 5th round pick, and that's why he was going so late. So now everybody, because it was a deep draft class, everybody that was a 1st or 2nd round pick is essentially going in the top 100.
Right.
And that's tough. That's tough to just invest in and be like, that's my wide receiver 3. He's gonna go out from the jump and just go for it.
Well,
It's kind of hard. Like Xavier Worthy, I expected to get a ton of this year, but he started at the range that Kadarius Toney was going last year. And Kadarius Toney, I fell for, and Sky Moore, all those guys, like very volatile guys that essentially could probably realistically only have about 600, 700 yards.
right.
That's what most of these receivers will have. And maybe they'll have a run late in the season. But if you invest in them with such a heavy position like a wide receiver 3, you probably won't be there
Right.
at the end to benefit from those, top 3 rounds or big 3-4 week stretches that they have at the end of the season.
I'm way more comfortable getting rookie receivers in a 0 RB build because I have so much depth before them. And then I'm like, okay, now I know they're not going to have to start for me in week 1 through 7, 8, 9. But when I want them to start is later, and that's okay. It almost feels like a wasted pick through week 1 through 9. But when it matters, of course, as long as your team did well enough to get you to the playoffs, you're hoping those boom weeks happen later on in the year.
It's almost even more important to if you want to consider a double stack, which means taking 2 skilled players in addition to their quarterback. There's almost a more importance to do that if you do take a rookie receiver.
Right.
Because if you go Xavier Worthy, it makes you feel a lot better if you also went Travis Kelce. Or if you went Brian Thomas and Christian Kirk / Evan Ingram. It makes you feel better that you may not be getting, if Trevor Lawrence comes back and he has a really solid year, well, maybe early on it's not going to be a ton of Brian Thomas. But guess what? Evan Ingram almost set the receptions record for tight ends. And Christian Kirk was on a pace for a career season before his groin injury. So if you rely on those guys early on and then wait for the second half of the season, Brian Thomas, stretch,
Right.
like you'll be there if you double stack.
Right, exactly. And then the final position, which is one of the hardest positions to get right in best ball. It's just all over the place. Sometimes you get, it's just the drop off is so big because you'll get 3 receptions for 30 yards out of the guys in like the 120s, 130s. And for us this year, and I said this earlier, there's about 6 guys you're really comfortable with. And this year there's about 11 really comfortable guys. You can get 2 of them and not have to get another guy in the whole rest of the draft, which is a big deal. Of course, you need to pay attention to the bye weeks, but all of those guys are going in the top 100. So if you want them, you have to invest in them. and it's a whole balancing act with this position almost.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of like I said earlier, it's gotten more condensed, and so Travis Kelsey is no longer going the first round; he's going the third. Well, also Sam Laporte is there, and then you have all these guys like Kyle Pitts, George Kittle,
Yeah,
Trey McBride, Dalton Kincaid. We can
I'll
go through the list.
yeah, I'll pull it up on the board so that everybody can see it now. And
Yeah,
so
essentially, you got a third rounder, fourth rounder, fifth rounder, sixth rounder, seventh rounder, seventh rounder, eighth rounder.
yeah,
That's where all these guys are going. And essentially, you need at least one. And again, it's not necessary, even more so this year, to go a bully tight end, getting Kelsey and Laporta, when you can get Brock Bowers in the eighth round, who can do very similar things. I can promise you that.
we've done a ton where we go Jake Ferguson, Brock
Yeah.
Bowers.
And the crazy thing is, normally there's always a tight end that is really high up that you just don't really trust his ADP. Last year, Dallas Goedert was going in the 70s, and it was just like you got Devontae and AJ Brown and rushing
Right.
quarterback. Didn't love ADP. Darren Waller, everybody was just trying to force, and he rose to like tight end 4 in these drafts, and I didn't have a single share, and I'm happy about that.
No, yeah, for sure.
But this year, the only one that we don't truly love is George Kittle, and he has as high of a ceiling, or if not more, than everybody on that list.
Right.
Just because he can go 3 catches, 90 yards, and 3 touchdowns, like he did against Dallas last year. But he also has those floor weeks. So when you're trying to differentiate, well, Evan Ingram last year only had like 2 or 3 games where he had less than 4 catches and just consistently 8 targets a week. George Kittle, he had a couple of boom weeks, but he was just way less volatile.
1 week. Okay, so let's see. Yeah, I mean less than 10. He 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 regular season. Yeah, he basically killed it all year long.
Mhm.
I mean, 5 weeks under 10 points out of the weeks that matter.
And he was going as a 10th round pick last year, if I remember correctly. And then, like I said, George Kittle, it's the same thing. If you believe in him, cool. But also, you have the ability to get a second tight end.
2.4 in the Super Bowl.
Yep.
For that guy. And we love George Kittle on this show, but 4.9, 1.1, 1.9, 4.9, 6.0. Evan Ingram didn't have anything under 6.8, I believe. And of course,
5 games below 5, essentially.
Right. And I mean, of course, you get this 27.7. That's awesome. But at the same time, when you get these other weeks, you're going to have a tight end that fills in for that week.
And this year, it's really nice to be able to get 2 of those tier 2 tight ends. But last year, because there wasn't a ton of guys going this early, really you could get the Evan Ingrams in the 10th round, and one of our best calls last year, Jake Ferguson, in the 19th, 18th round, because we knew Dallas loved the tight ends. If you love Sam Laporta, you got him in the 12th. Dalton Kincaid got him in the 13th.
Exactly.
So a lot of really Kyle Pitts and Darren Waller were the only true busts, but there were only about
Dallas Goedert too, because he got injured.
Yeah, he got hurt. But yeah, so with these guys, it's really good to probably prioritize getting one, at least at minimum one of those 11, and then 2 if it's a tier 1 and a tier 2, or 2 tier 2s, and you could be very solid for just a 2 tight end build.
Absolutely. And so let's see. You can one thing I will say, because we talked about quarterbacks, they cannot go in the flex. Tight ends can. So if you get, like we've been doing a lot, we get the Evan Ingram, Jake Ferguson, Njoku, Bowers. We get 2 of the 4 of those guys. They could both start for you on given weeks. Of course, you don't actually expect them to, though. You get the depth at other positions way earlier because you're still getting these guys in the 8th, 7th, 8th round. And then you're set at tight end and you're comfortable. So we'll just wrap this all up and get y'all out of here, and hopefully y'all can go win some best ball. Of course, we appreciate y'all hanging out with us. This is, something that we do when football's not going on, and we have so much free time to just attack this type of thing, and we of course Cam makes the rankings, and we of course I check them and I see if I agree or disagree. I don't agree with everything, of course, but it gives us an opportunity to see how they build and how this sets us up for redraft leagues all the time. Being able to see ADPs and see where guys are, that helps me so much more in redraft.
This is purely the best way to do research, and it's practice. It's routine practice. People invest the money into these leagues to draft, so there's a lot less. Oh, I'm going to pick a couple rounds, and then I'm going to lead the draft, and then the computer's auto drafting for you.
Right.
You rarely see just auto drafters from the jump. You'll see an occasional, outlier or two, with people
Sabotager.
being sabotaging. But other than that, like, it's so much sharper than doing a mock draft on a Yahoo or ESPN. And maybe there's some different scoring rules, but for the most part, this is where people will be ending up. And so you'll see some ADP differences between redraft leagues on ESPN, Yahoo, Sleeper, etc., versus DraftKings or Underdog Best Ball drafts. And a lot of it is because you're anticipating trends of
Right. And
of players.
and also you get rookies that are a lot higher because we have those boom weeks later and things like that, where of course those naturally are trends, but otherwise it's pretty straightforward and kind of gives you a good idea of like, do I want this guy over that guy? And then it makes you think, like, what kind of offense do they have? What are they doing? What's their quarterback situation? Like, we talked about the Giants. I don't like Malik Neighbors really at 31 because I just don't see them scoring a lot. Now, could he have, 100 plus catches? I mean, maybe, but I don't think that's more closer to his ceiling than his floor to me as a rookie this year. And so I'm just that's why I just don't see the scoring in their offense. And so we're off of him.
But yeah, we hope you guys enjoyed this video. Please like, comment, subscribe, do all those fun things. Please join us. We're live streaming every week going forward the rest of the summer. And then in football season, every Sunday morning, we will be here constructing, building, nerding out on lines, and answering any kind of questions that you may have going forward. Again, we can't thank you enough for the support you've given us so far. Let's keep growing this community. Let's have fun. And, yay for fantasy football.
Absolutely. And yeah, we hope y'all keep hanging out with us, and we'll see y'all next time.